this other situation is so slight when the defense already has other evidence, and the state has as well, of these issues for causation, that it simply shouldn't be allowed.
And Mr. Frank, if we go back to let's go back to the actual language of 404B. It says that evidence of another crime, wrong, or act, doesn't even have to be a prior bad act, or other act is admissible to prove the character, is not admissible to prove the character of a person in order to show action in conformity therewith. It may, however, be admissible for other purposes, such as, and then it goes on with our usual pigeonholed responses of motive, opportunity, lack of mistake or evidence. But it's actually a broader rule to say you can't use it for character evidence, but if you have another reason. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely, yep. I mean, the rule has a very good purpose, right? And we, in a court of law, we want the parties, we want the fact finder to focus on the facts of that particular incident and not to look at some other incident unless there is a connection of relevance between the two that's appropriate and not prejudicial. I always like to go back to Old Chief, the U.S. Supreme Court case that really talks about this as a sliding scale, right? What 404B recognizes is that evidence of some other crime, wrong, or act is potentially relevant, but you've got to explain why. It's got to be solid, and it's got to be for a proper purpose, not just propensity. Otherwise, the sliding scale of probativeness is just way down here at the bottom. And
let me touch on your prejudice concern. It sounds like from the state's questions during jury selection and the expert reports about chronic versus naive users of opiates, that even in the state's case in chief, there will be discussion of Mr. Floyd's challenge in dealing with drug addiction, that he was in fact addicted and he was trying and he was challenged by it. So the additional part of that he was found using drugs on May 6th, is the prejudicial value really that high vis-a-vis either your case or Mr. Floyd?
I think the prejudicial effect is exactly what Mr. Nelson has argued. It's his habit to take drugs and use drugs and fight with the police or disagree with the police and be agitated and crying. And that's the prejudice, is this police context to show bad character, right? I mean, that's the propensity. We use propensity as a substitute for character evidence. It's just
well, that also assumes that this is a on or off switch, that I let everything in for May 6th or nothing in. This can certainly be limited to what is probative and try and
right.
keep prejudicial things off. But okay, is there anything else you want to say? Because what I'm going to do, it's 5 to 9. I'm going to take it under advisement until tomorrow, at the very least. Mr. Nelson?
Your Honor, I do think, and I apologize, because again, this information continues to roll in. I do think that the interview of this witness that I just received, it's an FBI, is also potentially probative to this analysis. In terms, again, the state seems to be conflating cause of death and the reasonableness of the use of force. I mean, there are two separate issues in this particular case. These particular pills, according to this witness, were different than anything else that they had previously used. So I think I would like to, again, supplement, and I'm glad the court, because this interview, I think, is highly relevant to that.
Is this the stuff you just received? Well, when did you receive it? And I'm not faulting, I'm just saying, when did you receive it?
So this, my understanding is this was provided to the state on March 3rd. I believe it was mailed to me on the 6th, and I mean, I've been in trial, and so
Yes.
or selecting a jury.
Well, any objection to the court reviewing that as part of the offer of proof as to the 404B? All right, we'll receive that as an offer of proof for an in-camera review.
And with the caveat, now we're submitting something to the court without having the opportunity to address it. So
We'll talk about it again tomorrow.
very well.
I'll review it overnight. All right, so essentially we'll reserve further argument after I've had a chance to review that. So let's take a 10-minute break. Let's come back about 10 after, just so we can all readjust, get in place, and we'll check on whether our jurors are all here and whether they've all seen the video. All right, so we'll be in recess until 9:10.
they could be perceiving the situation in a different way, but in the way that they saw it. Again, I think taking in everything that each person says and then matching, or I guess after, when you have time, thinking about what they said and how it correlates with everything else that we've heard, everything else that has been presented to us. Because you have to assume that everyone's telling the truth or under oath, that what they present is correct, and really seeing how things align with the rest of the facts that are being presented.
Good. All right. Can you think of a situation in your life where you were 100% convinced that you were right, and then you later learned that you were wrong?
No, that's happened plenty of times.
And how do you how do you respond to that type of a situation?
You know, you feel embarrassed when it happens. Depending on the situation, apologizing to whomever you've had that situation with, and then thinking about where the miscommunication in my head might have gone that allowed me to think that I was right when I wasn't, to better understand the person who was right or the other side that was correct.
Okay. Now, ultimately, again, you know, the judge has told you, and I've referenced that you have to decide this case on the facts. That's your job as a judge of the facts, right? That's what jurors do, is to judge what happened in this particular case. And at the end of the case, the judge will give you the law that you need to decide, right? Do you think that you can listen to the law and follow the law even if you think the law is different or should be changed?
I believe so. I mean, following the law is something that I stand by very firmly, and so if it's the law, I believe it's something that you should be following.
Okay. I mean, so if, as the judge tells you, this is the law of this that applies to this particular case, and you think in your mind, law should really be different, that doesn't make sense, can you still follow the law as the judge gives it to you, even if you think it should be changed?
Yes.
So I am going to follow up with some questions specific to your questionnaire. But before I do that, I just kind of wanted to inquire further about your job and things of that nature. So at the time you filled this out, you were looking for a job, right?
Correct.
And you have since found a job in your field of study, and it would require you're a long-term sub, basically, right?
Correct.
And how long, I mean, just generally, have you been in that role a couple of days, a couple of weeks, or did you get the job, you know, a couple months ago?
So I got the job in January, but they recently had somebody leave, and so they switched me from my substitute position just around the school to this long-term sub in the last week. Okay.
And so ultimately, I mean, you know, this is the question is, you would need to find a sub to replace you, or the school would, right?
Correct.
Is that something you're willing to do? I mean, how does that affect you financially, professionally?
Right. I think financially it's a struggle, just because that money that I'm earning is helping me towards debt and whatnot. I don't know how easy it would be for them to find a replacement as well, because teachers are so scarce right now, especially during the pandemic. And I know they were looking for somebody for this position for a while, and then they just switched me into it because they couldn't find anybody. They didn't want to, because I was the building sub. They didn't want to switch me into it, but they had to. So I don't know how easy it would be for somebody to take over that position necessarily. those are my only concerns, I would say.
Okay. I guess in terms of understanding that jury service is a hardship for everyone,
Yes.
right? Would you be concerned that you're not going to be able to find a job after jury service, or concerned about the students?
I would say I don't know if I'm so concerned about finding a job afterwards. I think it's always a good lead to be in a job in a district, and then from there take on a full-time teacher role. I'm not sure if being away from this scares me so much from that being a possibility. It might be a possibility that it would prevent me, but I don't know necessarily if it would. I just know that if they do not find another long-term sub, the inconsistency of having a different person every day for the kids could be a struggle, especially because the class that it is has some students who need consistency. But those are my only concerns, I would say, so far.
Okay. Are you willing to set that aside, those concerns aside, and be a juror in this case? Or are the concerns so significant that it even is affecting your willingness to be here?
That's a loaded question in a sense that I have thought so much about it, and I am just at such a standstill with how I feel, because I believe it's the civic duty of everyone to do jury duty if they get selected, if they're called, but it's also so important to be with the students, especially during this year where it's been so crazy for them. Everything's been so wishy-washy for them because of the pandemic, and there's been so many changes that I've just been so stuck on that question, stuck on what's the right thing to do.
Right. Can I just have a moment to chat with Counsel Yerner? Sure. And one last question, though. Are you teaching in person or remotely?
I am in person.
All right. So I just got to ask you bluntly, right? Would this be a hardship for you to serve on this jury?
I think I'm so torn about it that I feel like my heart is saying that it more than likely would be. I'm so conflicted about the whole situation and whatnot that, yes.
Would the court like to inquire further?
No, the state was doing it. All right. Juror 63. I'm going to excuse you. I think it would be a hardship given the current state of your career and the students, and these times have been tough enough for us all. So I'm going to excuse you on hardship ground, and you're also excused from jury service generally. So the deputy, go with the deputy. He'll take some paperwork from you, and then you're free to go. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. So that was for cause. Good morning.
Good morning.
You are juror number 64, correct?
Correct.
All right. We have plexiglass between us in front of you and also in front of the attorneys when they're questioning you.
Okay.
The question, and I'll continue to wear my mask, the upshot being you can remove your mask if you feel more comfortable doing so, but if you would feel more comfortable wearing it, just fine.
Okay.
Occasionally some people prefer just to be able to speak more clearly, but I leave it up to you pretty much.
Okay, sure.
In either case, I would like you to move closer to the microphone so that we can hear your voice. That'd be wonderful. And before I turn it over to the attorneys, first of all, I have to swear you in to make sure all your answers are under oath. So if you could raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that you will truthfully answer all questions about your qualifications to serve as a juror?
I do.
All right, thank you. Well, first of all, you filled out a questionnaire, and thank you for doing so. It provides us a lot of information to start with. Is everything that you put on there true?
Yes.
Okay.
At the time, at least, it was.
Well, you kind of anticipate my next question, which is, we recognize that this is months ago that you filled this out. In reflection, you might realize there was something you should have added or even changed, that it was inaccurate and you need to correct it. And even some of your opinions might have evolved and changed. Given all that, you can say something different than what's on your questionnaire, just so that you know that. It's not like you're going to get in trouble. What we want is honest and open and candid information. So if you can do that, that'd be just fine.
Sure.
Most of the time, when I ask that question, people can't come up with anything. But the attorneys are probably going to walk you through some of your specific answers.
Okay.
And they'll even refresh your memory by reading your response.
Sure.
And if it's different or changed, just let them know.
Sure.
Okay? Now, the questionnaire did tell you not to read any more articles and to avoid media on this. But we understand, given the passage of a few months, that inadvertently you may have been exposed to information. You
Sure.
see a headline, a friend talks about it, and we told you don't tell anybody you're a potential juror, so you can't exactly quiet them and leave the room. Did anything like that happen? Did you get exposed to some information inadvertently?
Yes, unfortunately. So I work for a software development company that works for a major news organization that we maintain, own, and support their applications.
Okay.
So coincidentally, right after I got the questionnaire, my team decided it was a good idea to rewrite the code base for one of those applications for better supportability and maintainability going in the future. So the last 3 months, I've been rebuilding this application, staring at this application, and these articles obviously pop up every single time, right? I'm not going into them, reading them, but I'm seeing the headlines every day. There's just no way around it.
Okay, and do you recall the substance of those headlines or the little bit of information you were exposed to?
As far as like the substance,
Either the substance of this case or about pretrial matters or related matters or the attorneys or anything at all?
not in the moment, no. I mean, unfortunately, this case is the top of the news everywhere, so it's always the very top article.
It's always there, okay.
Yeah.
And the reason we ask this is we understand everybody's been exposed to some information. The question is, can you, as a juror, put aside all that information you've learned, put it in the back of your mind, and even some opinions you may have formed based on what you know, and
Sure.
decide this case just on the evidence you hear in this courtroom based on the law that I give you at the end of the case?
I want to say I can. It's not to say that it's one thing to say something, then something totally different to be in the situation and feel completely different about it. So I want to say yes, but in the moment, my answer is I don't know.
Okay, I'm going to explore that just a little bit.
Sure.
Every juror I've ever met wants to do the right thing.
Sure.
And is willing to do their duty and try. Unfortunately, it can't always be the case. Try, and obviously everyone wants a fair trial. And if you try and give it your best efforts, the question is, can you? And we put you in a tough spot. because what we do is we say, well, we know you've been exposed to some things, but can you put that aside when we go forward into this? And you really don't know what it is you're going to hear in this trial.
No.
And so the question is, we really need to probe a little bit to get your best answer, and there's no failure in one answer or the other. The only failure is if you tell me a lie. Do you think, looking inside yourself, that you can, not that you'll try, but that you actually can be fair and impartial here?
I believe I can.
Okay. And the attorneys might follow up on that. So,
Sure.
Continue to think about it, talk about it. So,
Okay.
did you recognize any of the witnesses that were on the list we gave you?
No.
All right. And we did talk about the trial length in the questionnaire. It appears that we'll have about 4 weeks of trial starting on March 29th. If you're selected as a juror, you'd be on your own until then, and then for 4 weeks you'd be essentially working full-time on this. Could you make that work with your personal life and work life?
Yes.
All right. No hardship there as far as you know?
Nope.
Okay. All right. Then with that, I'm going to... Sure. Always good to get advice from the lawyers. And they make a good point, which is, I didn't really ask you what this project that you're working on. Are you still working on it, or did you work at? Okay.
I still am working on it. We're at the end of it, but it's not done yet.
Okay. So some of these headlines and information that you've received may have been very recent.
As in yesterday, yes.
Okay, so even as recent as yesterday?
Yeah.
Last Friday or last Thursday even?
Every day.
Okay.
Every day, at least Monday through Friday.
Okay. And you pretty much, like you say, it's kind of the news of the day that just about every day when you're working on
Yeah,
this and it pops up?
It's always the top.
Okay. What headlines do you recall at all? Like, what did they say?
The most recent one would be the settlement.
Okay.
Right before that, I think the most recent one would have been, it was a history of George Floyd. Yeah, those are the most recent ones I've seen.
All right. Counsel, have any further questions? All right. I think given your good faith exposure to it, I know you weren't seeking it out, but...
it's not, I mean, like, sorry, boss, I can't work on this, but, you know...
Yeah, because I'm a potential juror, and
Yeah.
I know you couldn't say that. We know it was good faith, and so, but given the saturation that you've received through your work, I think we're going to excuse you from this panel. So we appreciate your honesty in that and bringing that to our attention. You're also released from jury service generally, so unless we send you summons in a few years, you're good to go.
Okay.
All right, you can go with the deputy. They'll take some paperwork for you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Sidebar on this next year.
Sure. All right, let's do the next juror. All right, good morning.
Morning.
You are juror 66, is that correct?
Yes.
All right. First of all, I'm going to swear you in because all your answers have to be under oath, so raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony or that you will truthfully answer all questions about your qualifications to serve as a juror?
Yes.
Okay. I'll also advise you that we have plexiglass between us, plexiglass in front of you. The attorneys will have plexiglass in front. I will also continue to wear a mask. The upshot being, you can take off your mask if you wish, or if you either for comfort or because you think you'd be heard more clearly. It's totally your call. In either case, I would like to have you pull up to the microphone so that we can hear you nice and loud. And thank you, first of all, for filling out the questionnaire. We got a lot of good information from that. In fact, I'm going to have you write something for me in a little bit that I'm going to have you write it just so you keep your identity, because it might tend to reveal who you are, and we don't want to do that. We're being very careful about that.
Okay.
First of all, the questionnaire, was everything true on that?
Yes.
All right. Anything you wanted to change or add to that questionnaire?
I don't think so, but it was, again,
Months
months
ago.
Mm-hmm.
And I want you to feel comfortable in changing or adding to the questionnaire, because we realize you fill it out, a couple months go by, you reflect and you realize some things are inaccurate or incomplete. Maybe your opinions have evolved. So anything you want to change, and most of the time it's going to happen when one of the attorneys asks you a question and you say, well, that was my answer at that time, here's what you need to know now. Perfectly fine. I want you to feel comfortable being able to change or add to your questionnaire answers. Okay? Now, the advisory in the questionnaire was also to not read any more articles or go online. But we also recognize that between when you fill out the questionnaire and today, a couple months have passed, and inadvertently, you may have been exposed to some information about the case, related cases, similar cases, something about this case that you think we should probably know that you've been exposed to. Anything like that happen?
It's kind of hard to avoid it.
It is.
Completely right now. And, you know, I have gotten some information from the news, just kind of like how this jury process is run, too, because when you get that little piece of paper in the mail, you don't get a lot of information. So, you know, I have seen a little bit on the news just based on like how this is going. Mm-hmm.
Actually, it probably just filled you in a little bit on how we're getting the job done, it sounds like.
Yeah.
Anything about the substance of the case or any related cases that you can recall?
Nothing that stands out, no.
Other than the information you just talked about, how recently do you think you've been exposed to information about this case or related cases?
Really just this case as far as like when people are getting selected, knowing kind of how many have been picked.
Okay. Anything from like last week, or are we talking?
Yeah, last week.
Okay, and that's pretty much the procedures we're using.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else recently that you've heard of?
Nothing stands out.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you. The whole point of this probing on how much you know about the case is for you to give us your honest opinion about yourself on whether you can put all that aside. Everybody who's come into this courtroom knows something about the case. It's some accurate, some not so accurate. But the bottom line being, you have to put all that aside as a juror, decide this case only on the evidence and the law that you receive from me at the end of the case. And the question for you is, can you do that?
Potentially, yes.
Okay. Tell me a little bit more about the potential one way and the potential the other way.
I don't know. I'm just kind of nervous.
That's okay. Almost everybody in that chair is nervous. You don't seem nervous, though. I'll tell you. You hide it well.
The mask helps.
Okay. But the only thing you have to worry about here is just telling the truth. So I hope when we get into a more conversational tone of this and not, and I hope you understand we don't try and be confrontational, although we have to probe into your personal life a little bit. We apologize for that, but it is necessary. And so I'm going to jump actually right to one of those items that you did indicate on your questionnaire that you have a relative who is a state trooper. And if you were to name that person, that would probably identify you, and we don't want to do that.
Yeah.
We're trying our best to keep you anonymous. So what I'm going to do, and don't lean over because camera angles are such that we don't want you to be in a camera shot. I'm going to give you a piece of paper. I'd like you to write that relative's name down so I can share it with the attorneys, if you would. All right, counsel, let's do the sidebar. Technology is not as good as we thought, so we're just going to share the paper with the attorneys. If that's
Okay.
all right. And while they're looking at that, I'll just ask you straight out, that name was not on the witness list that you saw, correct?
No, this is my cousin.
Okay. Is there anything, or is anybody else in that witness list look familiar to you?
Yes.
Okay, and who is that?
Jason Otto
Okay.
is a friend of a friend, or I'm co-workers with his husband and friends with him.
Okay, and what is his occupation?
He is the Minneapolis Park Police.
Okay.
I don't know his exact title.
All right. If that person actually testified in the case, do you think that your relationship with them might make it hard for you to be fair, or to put aside, oh, well, I know that person, so they're going to be higher in credibility automatically just because I know them, or do you think you can treat them like any other witness?
I would probably take their views as higher, yes.
Because you have a
Friendship.
friendship with him, and so pretty much take everything he says without a grain of salt, so to speak.
Yes.
Okay. Counsel, why don't we do this? We're going to try this again. See
Okay.
if it works. And what I'm talking to the lawyers about is this person going to be a central witness? Does not appear so, in fact, might not even be called. Knowing that, do you think you could still remain impartial in deciding this case?
No.
Okay, tell me why.
I don't want to be a part of this trial.
Okay.
So I think that's a big part of it.
Okay. Any specific reason? I'm going to flip to the last question on the questionnaire because I think that might be the best.
From when I filled out the questionnaire till now, more life changes have happened. Recently sold my house and would be moving out of our home during the trial, which would be really stressful if I can't help with that. I also have a child under 1 that I don't want to be away from them for that long.
Okay. And also, if you're deliberating and it goes overnight, you'd be kept in a hotel. You understand that?
Yeah.
Does that work?
No.
Okay. Let me talk to the lawyers one more time. Do you think it would be a hardship, basically?
Sorry?
Do you think it would be a hardship for you to
Yes.
serve on the jury?
Mhm.
Okay, you're pretty adamant about that, too. Okay. Mr. Nelson? Mr. All right. I'm going to excuse you on the basis of hardship from this case.
Thank you.
Sigh of relief for the record. That's all right. It shows you're being honest. You can go with the deputy. You are also released from jury service generally, so you don't have to report for any other cases.
Okay.
And
Thank you.
unless you get a summons in the future, a couple years from now. So, okay?
Yes, thank you.
All right. You bet. Just an observation, 8 out of the last 11 have been cause, so we're grinding to a halt. Nobody's fault, obviously. Cause is cause, so. But just an observation. We'll go with number 67. Okay, come on up and have a seat. Good morning. You are juror number 67?
Yes.
All right. Well, first thing I'm going to do is swear you in so that all your answers are under oath. If you could raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm, under penalty of perjury, that you will truthfully answer all questions about your qualifications to serve as a juror?
Yes.
All right. Now, I'm going to continue to wear my mask. You have plexi between us and plexiglass in front of you, and also the attorneys have plexiglass in front of them. The upshot being, if you wish for either comfort or to be heard more clearly, feel free to remove your mask while you're being examined. Totally up to you, but whether you have it on or not, if you could pull up a little bit to the microphone doesn't work well.
How's that?
It works, but yeah, that's
Yeah.
good. It is not very flexible, so you have to move instead of the microphone. So with that, you filled out a questionnaire, and thank you for doing that because it provided a lot of good information for us. Is everything on that questionnaire true?
Yes.
And I sometimes say still true because it's been months, and so we recognize that there may be information that you realize on reflection was wrong and you need to correct, or stuff you should have added to it, or maybe even your opinions have evolved. In any case, right now, can you think of anything that you would add or subtract?
No.
Okay. The attorneys in their questioning might prompt a memory or something. Feel free to volunteer any of the information. The bottom line is I want you to feel comfortable adding or subtracting. If it's different from what was in the questionnaire, that's just fine, given the passage of time. Now, the questionnaire also advised you not to read any articles about the case to avoid the media about it. And have you been able to do that pretty much?
Yeah, for the most part.
All right. several months have passed since the questionnaire, and so we recognize that sometimes inadvertently you get exposed to some information, either about this case or about related cases, or the attorneys, parties, whatever, something that could be relevant to sitting on this case. Have you been exposed to anything like that, like a headline, a newspaper blurb before you're able to turn the channel, anything like that?
So I've seen just like jury selection has started, article, headline.
Yeah.
I don't really
Okay.
read the news.
Okay, well, that's fine. Other than the procedures we're using, which are now not a big surprise because you've been subjected to them, anything else you can think of that you may have seen?
No.
What do you think was the most recent thing you've seen about, been exposed to?
Just that, jury selection had started.
Oh, okay, great. Now, the whole point, we go over that, and everybody's got some information about the case in the past year. The question is, can you put all that aside, what you've heard outside the courtroom, and decide the case just on the evidence you hear in the courtroom and the law that I give you?
Yes.
Okay. Any concerns about that? Being able to kind of separate and...
No.
Okay, excellent. All right. Did you recognize any witnesses on the list you were given?
No.
All right. The trial is going to be about 4 weeks long, we estimate, and it's going to start March 29th at 9 a.m. and go for about 4 weeks, where you're essentially working full time on the case. Does that work for you both as personal life and professional life?
I will make it work, yes.
And that's the key phrase. We understand that to some extent, jury duty can be a burden on everybody, but if you can make it work, that's what we need to know. So I appreciate your distinction there. It's a very important one. All right. Unless you have any questions for me, I'm going to turn over to the attorneys.
Nope.
All right. Then as to juror number 67, Mr. Nelson, you may inquire.
Morning, sir.
Good morning.
Thank you for being here. Thank you for your patience.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
It wasn't really my choice, but here we find ourselves. So what I'd like to do, sir, is I'd like to ask you a series of just kind of general questions about yourself, get to know you a little bit, and then I'm going to ask you some follow-up questions on your responses to the questionnaire, okay? When we get to the questionnaire part, I know it's a couple months ago you filled this out, and not trying to trick you, I'll read you your responses and things of that nature, okay? So let's assume that you and I were to meet in a different circumstance, a social event of some kind, a party, whatnot. What are a couple of things that I would walk away knowing about you after our first conversation?
Probably what I do and about my family.
Okay. And again, without disclosing, it's my understanding you're like a youth minister? Is that correct?
I'm an executive director
Okay.
of the organization, yeah.
Of a youth organization?
Yes.
Okay. At some point, you got this packet of information that said you were a potential juror in this case. You recall that?
Yes.
And do you recall what your initial reaction was to learning that you were a potential juror in this case?
Oh boy.
All right.
I'm also honored to be able to serve
Okay.
in this capacity.
All right. Why, oh boy?
I haven't been selected for jury duty before, and being my first time and the nature of the case.
Right. And we understand you had, I'm sure, heard about the case beforehand and things of that nature, right?
Yes.
It's obviously, significant news. Did you have concerns about your personal safety in that regard?
A little bit, like, I've got a family and things like that, and just in general, but
Okay.
I know that everything's being done to maintain anonymity.
All right. And how did you feel when you came to the government center this morning and saw its current condition?
Makes sense.
Okay. And do you understand that at some point, we don't know when, but it's very possible that your name would be released publicly?
Yes.
And are you okay with that?
Yes.
Okay. In your personal or professional life, can you think of a situation where you've been called upon to resolve a conflict between two people?
Yes.
So how do you approach a situation when two people are having a dispute?
Seek to understand both sides and find common ground.
Okay. And how about, well, let me ask you, you as a potential juror in this case, there's obviously a big dispute for you to resolve, which is the state of Minnesota versus Derek Chauvin, right? But within that jury room, there may be disputes that arise. How do you, let's take a hypothetical, right? One group of jurors is looking at a particular piece of evidence and saying it's extremely important. Another set of jurors is disagreeing with that and thinks it's irrelevant, that same piece of evidence. How do you approach that situation?
Again, kind of try to go back to finding out what we have common ground on, and then having each of the parties kind of express why they believe that it is important, and then trying to come to an agreement.
Okay. And if you were the juror who thought that this piece of information was super important and others disagreed with you, so you're now not trying to resolve the dispute, you're part of the dispute. How do you deal with that?
I would want to check my own bias and try to understand if I'm, thinking wrongly about it, and, be willing to be open and listen to others' input.
Okay. Are you willing to re-examine your own beliefs or your own perspectives about something?
Yes, of course.
What if you don't change your opinion after you re-examine your own bias? What if you're convinced it's still the most important piece of evidence and others disagree with you? Do you abandon your belief simply for the sake of consensus?
I don't think I would abandon it, but I would try to continue to move forward with other parts of the whole trial, if that makes sense.
In your personal or professional life, can you think of a situation where you have been called upon to determine whether someone is telling the truth about a situation?
Yes.
Right. How do you approach that situation?
I'd ask a lot of questions and just try to get a read on the person,
Okay.
And try to empathize with them as well, and see, from their perspective, what's going on.
Okay. Can you think of a situation in your life where you have been 100% convinced of something only to later learn you were wrong?
Yes.
Okay. And tell me, what's your response to a situation like that?
I'm apologetic, kind of blown away at how convinced I can be at something and then be totally wrong. It's humbling.
Okay. And if you were a juror in this case, you understand that you you would be a judge, in a sense, a judge of the facts of what happened. But at the end of the case, the judge is going to give you the law that you have to apply the facts as you determine them to be. Can you apply the law that the judge gives you, even if you think it is wrong or should be changed?
Yeah.
Okay. No problem with that?
No.
And you believe that you can be a fair and impartial juror as a part of this process?
Yes.
So I'm going to follow up with some questions on your questionnaire.
Yeah.
And I want to start by, again, thanking you for taking the time to fill this out. We understand that everybody has some degree of knowledge. This is obviously a major case, and that everybody has some degree of knowledge about what's happened, or what's alleged to have happened. So the first question you were asked is to just kind of write what you knew. And you wrote, the police were responding to a suspected counterfeit bill and pulled over George Floyd, who was driving under the influence. Mr. Floyd resisted and Derek Chauvin put his knee on Mr. Floyd's neck to restrain him. Mr. Floyd died in that position in police custody. There are more details, I'm sure, but I don't recall them all exactly. That's what you wrote. Since writing that, I think the judge has asked you a few questions about what else you may have learned, and that was limited to sort of the jury selection process. Mm-hmm. Is that a yes? I'm
yes.
Sorry. Yes, sorry. Nothing else stands out in terms of what you recall about this event?
No.
All right. You were asked a couple of questions about your general impression of Mr. Chauvin, as well as your general impression of Mr. Floyd, and you checked both somewhat negative and neutral as applied to both individuals. Do you recall doing that?
Yes.
Okay. So it's fair to say that to some degree you have formed a negative impression of Mr. Chauvin. Would that be fair?
Yes.
And that's okay. You're perfectly entitled to your opinion. And is that simply, as I understand what you wrote, is I don't know them or fully understand the situation they were facing in the moment, but Mr. Floyd died in their custody. That's what you wrote. So explain to me why you have a somewhat negative opinion of Mr. Chauvin as well as a neutral beyond what you wrote.
Yes. So I haven't met either of them, so I don't know them. I don't know the situation that they were in. But for both parties, it just looks bad. And so, given that, I have a somewhat negative.
I mean, someone died,
right?
And that's tragic and sad, right?
Yes.
With respect to Mr. Floyd, you wrote, again, I don't know him personally, but he was under the influence and resisted police.
Right.
And so you formed a somewhat negative impression of Mr. Floyd because of what you understand to be the facts about him at that time.
Correct.
That's a fair assessment?
Yes.
I don't want to put words in your mouth, but, obviously I just want to make sure you're the right juror. You wrote that you had seen some video of Mr. Floyd's death, and I want to make sure we're talking about the same video. A video was taken by a bystander. That video was uploaded to a social media platform. That video went viral and became a news story. Is that the video that you understood this question to be about?
Yes.
Other than that video, have you seen any other videos that were released publicly?
No.
Okay.
I don't think so.
So there were some body camera videos that were released. There were some store or some security surveillance videos. You never saw those?
No.
And you checked that you had seen that bystander video 2 to 3 times. So was it, let me ask you this, did you see a long form or a more complete version, or did you see clips on the news?
Yeah, I saw clips on the news or like on social media, just, scrolling as pops up kind of thing.
Okay. Did you ever watch what we would describe as the entire bystander video?
No, not in entirety.
Okay. You were asked about your conversations with family, friends, or social media commentary that you may have made, and you wrote that you had talked about it, and that Mr. Floyd, your opinion was that Mr. Floyd's death was wrong, and we should speak up and speak out against racism.
Mm-hmm.
So you used the word wrong. What did you mean by Mr. Floyd's death was wrong?
That he shouldn't have had to die. Whatever caused that death, I'm not sure of, but someone died, and that is wrong.
Okay. And how does his death attach to conversations about racism?
Because I think that was the main conversation that everyone was having, was that it was a white police officer and an African American man.
Okay. And I mean, so again, you know, it's your right to have an opinion and your right to form those opinions based on your own experiences, your own belief system, and nobody's questioning that, right? The question becomes, however, can you take those opinions that you've formed, can you set them aside and judge this case exclusively on the evidence that is presented in court?
Yes.
And even if you may have learned certain information from those conversations or from the media, some of that information may not be in court. Can you set that information aside and judge it exclusively based on what's in court?
Yes.
All right. You were asked a question about whether you had participated in any demonstrations or marches, and you wrote, no, but we did talk to our kids about it and pray for everyone involved. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
After everything was happening, we shared with our kids at home just kind of what was going on, and tried to explain it to them, and then prayed for everyone involved and prayed for everyone that was going out and protesting, marching, and prayed for the families and everyone involved. Yeah.
Did that include Mr. Chauvin?
Yes.
You were asked a couple of questions about the aftermath, so to speak, of Mr. Floyd's death. In terms of the protests, you indicated that a couple of businesses that you frequent or have been to were vandalized in the course of the riots. Anything about that situation? Like, have you had conversations with those store owners about their experiences?
No.
Okay. You just happen to have been to a place and it was looted or vandalized in the rioting, right?
That's correct.
Okay. You were asked whether you felt the aftermath had a negative or positive effect on the protests. And you wrote, I think the whole community has been affected in both positive and negative ways, yet I hope that we are all better people as a result of it all. Right? So let me ask you this. Do you draw a distinction between protesting and rioting?
Yes.
Can you explain for me what you see the difference in those two things to be?
I think that protesting is peacefully gathering to raise awareness about a social cause or a cause that you have, whereas rioting is just kind of going wild in the streets.
Okay. And do you associate those individuals who were peacefully protesting with the rioting?
No. I think some of them may have crossed over in some ways, but no, there was peaceful protesting, and then there was also rioting.
Okay. You were asked a series of questions about your contact with police in your personal life and whether you or someone close to you had been a victim of a crime. And I need to ask you, or just tell you, you obviously have a right to have that kept private because you answered a question that I'd like to ask you about. And so are you comfortable talking about what you wrote here in court today?
Yes.
Okay. You wrote that when you were young, your parents would fight and the police would get called to those situations at times?
Yes.
Okay. How old were you approximately when that was happening?
Probably about, I think it was about, well, it was multiple times. So
I'm sorry?
It was multiple times.
Oh, gotcha.
So I would say age 11, 12 through like 15, 16.
Okay. So your parents had a relatively tumultuous relationship?
Yes.
Right. And when you say when things got out of control, you would call the police yourself?
I did, and then my sister did as well.
Okay. Did those events turn physical? Is that what you mean by out of control, or just?
Yes.
Okay. And when the police came or responded, you wrote that you felt that you were somewhat satisfied based on their response, and you wrote, "I don't remember the police as much as the situation." So do you think that based on what you do remember of the police involvement in those events, do you think that they handled the situation well as far as you were concerned?
I think so, yes. I was just more focused on my parents and, not the officers.
Right, understood. And were either of your parents ever arrested as a result of these?
Yes.
Were you ever called upon as a witness or to be a witness against your parents in court?
No.
Okay. Do you know if your parents had to go through the legal either one of your parents, whichever one it was, had to go through the legal system as a result of those incidents?
I don't think so. It was just kind of they were drunk and fighting and would sleep it off and then come home.
Okay, gotcha. So alcohol was involved in these disputes?
Yes.
Okay. Is there anything about those memories that would affect or impact your ability to be a fair or impartial juror, both as it applies to Mr. Chauvin, but also to the state of Minnesota?
Could you state the question again?
Sure. Sorry, it was a little confusing. I mean, we all come to this with our own personal life experiences, right? And you know yourself better than we do, and I'm asking you whether anything about your kind of upbringing or these situations with your parents that would bias you against either Mr. Chauvin or the state of Minnesota.
No.
Okay. You can set that aside. You recognize it's a different situation than what we're dealing with here.
Yes.
Okay. You were also asked about whether you had ever seen the police use more force than was necessary, and you wrote, "One time in Georgia, some police thought we broke into a skate park. They were not physically forceful, but verbally quite aggressive for the situation." Can you tell me more just about what happened in that situation?
Yeah, so we showed up at a skate park and the owner had hidden a key for us, and so we went in and were skating in the park in the middle of the night, and police officers arrived and thought we had broke in, and were pretty forceful in their language and how they treated the situation because of their perspective. And we were like, "It's okay, it's fine, we have a key." The owner let us in, and so it was kind of just a misunderstanding. But I do understand from their perspective, like, we were in the park and it's closed. So it makes sense.
And it was, you said, the middle of the night?
Yes.
Okay. And so you understand that they may have perceived that as a crime occurring, right?
Right.
And when you say that they were aggressive in their language, were they like cursing at you and things of that nature, or were they just very forceful in their, like were they yelling at you?
Very forceful.
Okay. But ultimately you were able to resolve this misunderstanding?
Yes.
Okay. You recognize that sometimes police officers have to use verbal force?
Yeah.
Anything about that situation that would, again, either bias you against Mr. Chauvin or the state of Minnesota?
No.
Okay. You were asked if you have ever been put in a chokehold, and you checked the box yes, and you said just as a kid, probably wrestling with friends. Like someone grabbed you around the neck or something, or what happened there?
Yeah, just in wrestling, hanging out with buddies,
Okay. But you've never received any formal training on how to put someone in a chokehold or being put in a chokehold in any way?
Correct.
All right. So there are a series of questions, or I should say statements on this questionnaire, and you were asked to rank your thoughts on these questions, or your agreement or disagreement about these statements. Do you remember that generally? I know you don't remember the exact statements, but do you remember that generally in this process?
Yeah, somewhat.
Okay. So I'm just going to read a couple to you and ask you to kind of explain why you may have answered these that way. Make sense?
Yep.
All right. You wrote, police in my, or the statement was, police in my community make me feel safe. And you somewhat agreed with that. Why would you somewhat agree with that versus strongly agreeing with that or disagreeing with that?
Sorry, what did I put again?
Somewhat agree. I somewhat agree.
Yeah, so I would say like most of the time, yes. Sometimes being a skateboarder, you know, you get yelled at and stuff like that, and so it's like, well, I don't feel safe when I'm being yelled at for cruising down the street or whatever. But
okay.
So
in your hobby as a skateboarder, you've been hassled by the cops here and there.
Yeah.
Skating where you're not supposed to skate, kind of a thing.
Yes.
All right. And do you recognize they're simply telling you to follow the law?
Yes.
All right. Anything about that would make you biased again? You understand this case involves a Minneapolis police officer, and there will be police officers who testify in this case. Do you understand that?
Yes.
Anything about your feelings or those experiences that, again, would bias you for or against either party?
No.
All right. The statement is read. The statement reads, discrimination is not as bad as the media makes it out to be. And that's an awkward phrase, but so discrimination is not as bad as the media makes it out to be. And you somewhat agreed with that. Can you explain your thinking in that?
So I think discrimination does exist. I think that the media amplifies it for good reasons or bad reasons. I think the media just amplifies it.
Okay. There is a comment or a statement here that says, police in this country treat whites and blacks equally, and you somewhat disagreed with that.
I think that, again, most of the time, I think that there is some equal treatment, but there is times when there is, where people are treated differently because of the color of their skin.
Okay. And then there was a statement that says, I think that news reports about police brutality against racial minorities is only the tip of the iceberg, and you strongly agreed with that statement. Why would you strongly agree with that statement?
Because could you read the statement one more time?
I sure can. I think that news reports about police brutality against racial minorities is only the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah, because I think that, again, the media tries to amplify all of the situations. I think there are a lot of broken pieces to our whole system and racism and justice, and so I think it is the tip of the iceberg. There's a lot of things that we need to work on as humans together, but I think that the media tries to amplify it, which can be good or bad, depending on how they do it.
Okay. You were asked a couple of questions about your perceptions relevant to the Black Lives Matter and the Blue Lives Matter, whether they be movements, organizations, or a combination of both. And you wrote that you are very favorable that Black lives do matter, but not favorable of the BLM organization. Can you explain that?
Yeah, so I don't know a whole lot about the BLM organization, but I do believe that Black lives do matter.
Okay. And with respect to the Blue Lives Matter statement, you described that you were very favorable of the Blue Lives Matter, and you wrote, I am for life, both black and blue.
Yes.
Just a couple of other questions here. You were asked a series of questions about your opinions regarding the the justice system. And you were asked, do you believe that the jury system in this country is a fair system? Why or why not? And you wrote, my general assumption is yes, but I don't really know because of my limited knowledge. So can you just, again, expand on that a little bit? Are you just saying, I don't know anything about how the jury system works, and you're assuming it? I mean, explain.
Yeah, I assume that, yes, it is fair. I think that we work hard to try to make it as fair as possible, but again, I don't know all of the inner workings of it, and so, yeah.
Okay. The second question was, do you believe our criminal justice system works? Why or why not? And you wrote, it depends on how you define works, and in quotes. And you said, I think sometimes it does and sometimes it does not. There is no perfect system. So how would you define the word works in that context?
So I would say that is justice administered? And I would say, again, majority of the time, yeah. But sometimes we get it wrong.
Okay. You were asked about the presumption of innocence in criminal cases, and you wrote, I agree and I am thankful for this liberty, yet in my faith we are all guilty of wrong, and you cite a biblical reference. You understand that the so-called moral law is not applicable here. Do you understand that?
Correct.
The judge will define what the law is for you, and your job would be to determine whether or not there's a conviction or an acquittal in this case. Do you understand?
Yes.
And that would be regardless of your faith.
Right.
You were asked whether you wanted to serve as a juror in this case, and you checked yes, and you wrote, I would like to participate in justice. Can you define the word justice for me here?
That which is just and right.
Okay. Do you have you formed an opinion one way or another what constitutes justice in this case?
No.
Would you agree that justice could involve a not guilty verdict?
Yes.
May I have a moment, Your Honor?
All right. Juror number 67, we're going to excuse you from this panel and also from jury service generally, so you won't be needed on another case. And so you can go with the deputy, they'll take some paperwork from you, and you can go about your business. Thank you, though, for taking the time for the questionnaire and answering our questions.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right. take our 20-minute mid-morning break. 11:15, please. Juror 69, correct? All right. All right, sir, come on up and have a seat right in the chair. All right, you are juror 69, is that correct?
That is correct.
All right. First thing I'm going to do is swear you in so that all your answers are under oath. If you could raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm, under penalty of perjury, that you will truthfully answer all questions about your qualifications to serve as a juror?
I do.
All right, thank you. Just a note here, I'm going to continue to wear a mask. You have plexiglass between us, plexiglass in front of you. The attorneys will be at the lectern with plexiglass in front of them. The conclusion being, if you would like to remove your mask for more comfort or to speak more clearly if necessary, feel free to do so.
Okay.
But it's pretty much your choice.
Okay.
In either case, mask or not, if you could move up closer to the microphone so that we can pick up your voice nice and loud. Perfect. Well, first of all, before I turn you over to the attorneys, I have a few questions of my own. Starting with, you filled out a questionnaire, and thank you for doing that and getting back to us. It gives us a lot of information. Is everything on that true and correct?
It is.
All right. Any changes or additions to the questionnaire?
No, I don't believe
Okay.
so.
And it's very important that you understand that it's okay to do that because you filled this out months ago. In the meantime, you might have reflected on things and realized, I should have said this, or that was inaccurate, I need to correct that. Or even some of your opinions may have evolved and changed. So
Oh, sure.
if you say anything that's different from the questionnaire, that's perfectly fine. So don't worry about that. Now, the questionnaire also advised you not to read any media, to avoid the media about this case. But we also recognize it was a couple months ago, and inadvertently you may have been exposed to some media, some headlines, maybe a news blurb before you were able to change channels, something like that. Did that happen to you? Did you get exposed to some information about the case?
Yeah, I would say scrolling through like Instagram or something, I would see headlines maybe about just like the recent news of like Minneapolis paying out to George Floyd's family.
Okay.
And then something about a third-degree charge, but I kind of skipped past that. So.
All right. Talk about the third degree part first. You don't recall any substance other than it was mentioned? Did you?
That was pretty much it. That there was, I read like the Chauvin case and third-degree charges were brought up, and then jump past that.
Okay. Now, as far as the thing from last week, what specific details do you recall?
Just looking through, let's see, it would have been Star Tribune saying payout of $27 million, or something like that,
Okay.
to the family.
Now, you understand that was a civil case, different parties, different legal issues, different laws, and really has no bearing on this case.
Right.
But even though from a legal point of view, everything I've said is true, do you think that would make it hard for you to be impartial, or does that push you one way or the other in this case?
Oh, no, it doesn't.
Okay. Can you put aside what you heard and just decide this case on the facts and what you hear in the courtroom?
Yes.
And that's true generally of everything, because everybody. That's why the first question we asked was, "What have you heard?" Everybody has some knowledge about the case. Some is accurate, some is inaccurate. But whatever you've heard about the case, and I'm sure most people have formed various opinions related to what they've learned, you have to put all that aside. Decide this case just on the evidence, objectively, and apply the law as I give it to you. Despite being exposed to some things, do you think you can decide this case objectively, fairly, and above all, impartially?
I do.
Okay. Can you put everything else aside?
Right.
Okay. Did you decide, or did you recognize any witnesses that were on the list we gave you?
I did not.
Okay. We have estimated that the trial is going to be about a month long, starting March 29th. essentially start that and go for 4 weeks. Does that work for you personally, professionally?
I mean, it's just getting into the busy part of my job.
Okay.
You know, we have projects ramping up, but I'm sure that's something that we could figure out.
Okay. And it's more a question of can you make it work? Because we know that there's a certain burden on everybody for jury duty. And we appreciate that, and we try and accommodate if it's an extreme hardship. But it sounds like you can make it work?
Yes.
All right. All right, then, unless you have any questions for me.
I do not.
All right, then I'm going to turn over the attorneys. With regard to Juror 69, Mr. Nelson.
Could we have a brief?
Sure. I'm just going to talk to the attorney. All right, Mr. Nelson.
Thank you, Judge. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
Before I kind of go into the questions I have for all of the jurors, I just wanted to follow up a little bit in terms of your knowledge about this recent settlement that was paid out or is to be paid out by the city. If you were in the jury room, right, and people are kind of, they're discussing guilty or not guilty, would you in any way bring up that settlement as, hey, look, the city agreed that there's some liability here or whatever? How would you take that information into the jury room?
I mean, I guess, if it's not something that should be part of it, I just wouldn't even bring it up.
You wouldn't even bring it up?
If it's not part of this case, then I wouldn't, it doesn't have a spot in it.
Well, I think what we're telling you is it's not a part of this case. It's,
Right.
It's a different case,
Right.
different legal standards. Do you
Right.
understand that?
I understand.
Okay, and we just need to make sure that we're not going to have that information in some way affect the judgment in this case.
Right.
And you can do that?
I can do that.
Okay. All right, sorry, I just wanted to explore that a little further before, we don't want to waste anyone's time,
Yep,
obviously.
makes sense.
So I'm going to ask you a series of questions generally, just to get to know you a little bit better, and then I'm going to ask you some specific questions about some of your answers on the questionnaire.
Sure.
Again, we understand that it's been some time since you filled this out, and I'll read you your responses. We're not trying to trick you, okay?
Okay.
All right. So if you and I were to meet at a party or some sort of a social event, and we had our first conversation, what are a couple things I'd learn about you in that conversation?
I just love doing anything outdoors. Avid fisherman. I mean, you name it. Just hard worker. Want to be outside.
Okay,
That's about it.
fair enough. You avid fisherman, you said?
Yes, sir.
Okay, like most Minnesotans, right?
Yeah, you gotta.
All right. I'm going to ask you, because of the mask, and you may need to come a little closer to the microphone for me if you don't mind, because I also have kind of
Sure.
bad ears. Thanks. So at some point you received this packet of information, right?
Yep.
And you learned that you were a prospective juror in this case. And you'd obviously heard about this case before. You knew that. So what was your initial response to this jury, to learning that you were a potential juror in this case in particular?
I mean, I wasn't really excited about it, just given the kind of global scale that it has reached. I wasn't really looking forward to it. I don't know.
You said you were not looking forward to it?
Right.
Okay. I think you ultimately expressed some concerns about safety. Do you remember that?
Yes, I do. Just concerns about, either way, whichever this case would go, and again, the popularity and how extreme things, had happened after the event, that it makes me a little concerned.
Okay. So let me ask you, when you got to the government center this morning and you saw the fortifications and preparations around the government center, how did that make you feel?
Very secure, actually. Yeah, it looks.
Okay.
It looks good.
And how about this morning when the judge kind of told you that your video or your face isn't going to be shown if you were a juror? We're doing what we can to protect your anonymity. How did that make you feel?
Yeah, it makes me feel better. I mean, I trust that that's what's happening. So.
Okay. And if you were to, it's entirely possible that at some point in the future your name would be released publicly if you were to serve as a juror in this case. How does that impact you?
I mean, I'm aware that would happen. I would just hope that it would be after a period of time where things can kind of cool down a little bit, and maybe not so much press about it.
Do you have, you understand there's two potential outcomes of this trial, at least theoretically, right?
Right.
A guilty or not guilty verdict.
Right.
Do you have more concerns if the verdict were to be one versus the other?
Yeah, I suppose I would if it was not guilty.
And do you think that people, that would in some way affect you and how you may choose to vote in this case? No,
I mean, I'm kind of like do the right thing and kind of try to live by that code. So.
Okay. And I'm going to ask you a couple of other questions about that once we get to your questionnaire. Can you think of a situation in your personal or professional life where you've been called upon to resolve a conflict between two people?
Maybe not like called on for like a verbal debate that something's happening.
Yeah, you got two friends, they're disagreeing with each other, and they turn to you and they say, Juror 69, help us resolve this dispute.
I would say not really, no. If they are in front of me having a dispute, I would say like, let's break it up, or.
Right. So you understand, if you were to be a juror in this case, ultimately there's kind of global big disputes, right? In terms of, is it a guilty or a not guilty verdict? There's a dispute between Mr. Chauvin and the state of Minnesota here right now.
Right.
I understand that. And you'd be called upon to potentially resolve that dispute.
Right.
But then also within the jury room itself, right? You got 12 citizens, and there may be disputes about the importance of evidence or testimony. So how would you picture yourself simply approaching the task of resolving a dispute?
I would lean on evidence that was brought up and try to stick to facts and just be like, let's look at this and tackle this piece of evidence and weigh it and see, like, how does this affect the outcome here?
Okay. So let's say, for example, that there was a particular piece of evidence, right, that you felt, this water bottle is the answer to this dispute, to solve this dispute. And other jurors thought, that's nothing, it's just a water bottle, right? How do you kind of reconcile or get to the bottom of whether that piece of evidence is important or not?
I would have to rely on any notes I took and say, like, hey, I really think there's something here. it's worth discussing at least, and we need to come together as a group to at least address that this is an issue.
Okay. And what about if after that process of doing that, you were still convinced it was important, but the others weren't? Are you the type of person that's going to agree with the majority simply because you want to build consensus? Or are you going to stand your ground and say, no, we really need to take this into consideration?
I think after, we had all talk about it, that if the group votes on it, then it's a dead issue there.
Well, I guess that's sort of the question, isn't it? Any verdict has to be unanimous.
Right.
Right? And if you really believed that
Right.
that was important, are you going to just abandon your belief about that piece of evidence simply to reach an agreement?
No.
Okay. Are you willing, however, to re-examine your beliefs about the evidence or the material that's presented in court?
I would say yes, I'd be open to re-looking at that.
Okay. Can you think of a situation, again, in your personal or professional life where you have been called upon to determine whether someone is lying about something?
Yeah, no, I don't really get caught up in that.
Probably not?
No.
Okay. So, as a juror, as the judge mentioned earlier, is one of your roles is to assess the credibility of witnesses in this case. And it's a fancy way of saying, do we believe this person, right? How would you approach the analysis of whether someone is credible or not credible, whether they're lying or not?
Geez, I don't know, that's a good question. I just try to listen to what they have to say, basically, and I don't know, just determine based off of cues of, how they're acting, or I guess first and foremost I would just listen to everything that they have to say. And
okay. So let's take it a little bit perhaps broader. You have two witnesses, right? Think about this in the proverbial sense. There's a traffic accident, and the issue was the light green or the light red, right? There's two people standing right next to each other, watching the same thing, and one person says the light was green, the other says no, it was red, right? So how can you kind of picture yourself trying to determine? They're both convinced, right? They both see it from their perception. They're standing right next to each other. It's the same event. How do you weigh which one to assign credibility to?
I don't think that would be up to me in that scenario, and I understand the point of the question here is, to determine if I would be able to. But if I was coming into that scenario, I would first just be like, I'm a very trustworthy person, so I would say, look, I'm sure that's what you saw, and I'm sure that's what you saw, but I guess I wouldn't put myself in the spot to say, you're right, you're wrong.
Okay. Ultimately, as a juror, you're a judge of the facts, right? And in a case like this, you may have two people who are observing the same incident from the same general perspective, right? Mm-hmm. And they may interpret that event differently. And it is your job as a juror to decide. So do you think you could do that?
I might have lost you there. I guess I don't understand if I'm able to, based off of facts, and then say, if I was yeah, I can see that based on this evidence that yours was green, I could say, look, you thought it was red, but it was green.
Okay. So
if that's what you're asking.
That's what I want to kind of ask you is, you can look at the other evidence that may support one side or the other side. Right? And you would be able to assess and judge the facts of this case based on all of the evidence, not just one single person.
Right.
Okay. Can you think of a situation in your life where you have been 100% convinced that I am right? only to later learn that you were in fact wrong?
I mean, mine are day to day. My wife's always right, so I lose at that a little bit.
Right.
You know, I'll think that I'm right on something and then forget, or yeah,
Okay.
not on like a major. Well, go ahead.
I understand. You know, I think someone referenced like a sports statistic, right? And you may think about like, I'm 100% convinced that this athlete had this stat, and then you look it up and it's like, oops, I'm wrong.
Right.
So are you the type of person that kind of learns from that, applies it in future situations, or are you the kind of person that goes, it's not that important?
No, absolutely. I'll constantly learn from those.
All right. Again, ultimately, your role or your job as a juror is to listen to the evidence, listen to both sides, listen to the entirety of the case, and at the end of the case, the judge will present you with some rules of law that you have to apply. Are you the type of person? Well, let me ask you. Rephrase that. Will you follow the law as the judge instructs you, even if you think it is wrong or should be different?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to ask you some questions again on your questionnaire, not trying to trick you, not trying to suggest you're not telling us the truth, right?
Sure.
We have to take you at face value. We don't know what's really in your heart or in your mind, right? So the first question that you were asked is just a general recitation of what you knew about this case based on what you had heard or seen prior to filling this out. And I have a couple of questions about what you wrote. One of the things you wrote is that you saw a video through social media, and you wrote, "The footage was pretty clear, and I recall a woman's voice pleading with officers to ease up on George, saying he can't breathe." What do you mean by the statement, "the footage was pretty clear"?
You can make out the officers, and it was just clear video in terms of resolution, I suppose.
Okay.
And just the general sense of what had been captured that day, like on the footage.
Okay. And I'm going to just skip forward a little bit. I just want to make sure we're talking about the same footage, right? You understand, or there was a bystander who took a video of Mr. Floyd's interaction with the Minneapolis Police Department. That video was uploaded to a social media platform, went viral, and became news.
Right.
Is that the video that you recall seeing?
I only saw the video footage from pretty much the kneeling stance on.
Did you say the media stance?
Yeah, I guess. No, not the media, like the Facebook video that was out there.
Okay.
I didn't see the interaction before George was detained.
Okay.
Only from that point on.
Okay. So just the only video you've seen is that bystander video that went viral and became a part of the news.
That is correct.
Okay. Not seen any of the body cameras from the officers or security cameras that may have been entered the public sphere?
Right. No, I have not.
Okay. And I think you said you had seen that maybe 2 to 3 times in whole or in part.
Just in part, clips, a couple times, yeah.
You never went and looked up the original video and watched the entire video?
No, I did not.
Okay. And then one of the other things you wrote is that as time progressed, the media started to change the verbiage from, and you put in quotes, the death of George to the murder of him. Or can you just explain what you mean and what impact that had on you?
Yeah, it just seemed like, and again, I pretty much just had been looking at headlines up until the point about finding out about being selected, that a lot of different media sources were saying that it was either the death or it slowly turned into headlines saying like the murder of, and that just grew more and more over time, it seemed like.
Okay. And that is, it's fair to say that you sort of adopted that perspective for yourself, right? That opinion?
I mean, I get that it's not up to media to make that decision.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we're here for. I don't know.
Well, and sir, let me just assure you that your opinion is your opinion, right?
Yeah.
I'm not questioning your opinion. I need to know, and we all need to know, the extent to which your opinion may bias you against either party, whether it be Mr. Chauvin or the state of Minnesota. Do you understand that?
Yes.
Okay. I mean, and ultimately in your questionnaire, you were asked if you had had conversations with your friends and family about this incident, right?
Correct.
And you were asked to share what opinions you had expressed, whether it be with friends and family, and whether or whether it be on social media platforms, right? And what you wrote was George Floyd had been murdered by police officers.
Right.
So you formed the opinion, right, that George Floyd was murdered by police officers.
Right.
So, kind of go back. I mean, you adopted that stance that the media had kind of changed, right?
Right.
And you were asked in the questionnaire a question of the impression that you had of Mr. Chauvin based upon what you had seen and heard. And you wrote that you had a very negative impression, right?
Right.
And you wrote that from the video footage and people pleading for George's life, the defendant didn't let up.
Right.
So ultimately you understand that as we sit here, based on the presumption of innocence, right, have you already decided this case in your mind?
I think that as all those headlines are coming through and, maybe subconsciously adopting them or I have adopted them, as you're saying, it probably was easy for me to just say, like, oh, have you seen what the news is saying?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, in the questionnaire, there's a question that asks you about the application of the presumption of innocence.
Right.
And I think you said, in this case, based on the footage that you've seen, that it would be very difficult for you to presume him innocent. Would you agree with that?
Right, yeah.
And so, again, the question being, right, you have formed a strong opinion. It is your absolute right to do so.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's your opinion, you're based on the media, whether it's your opinion based on conversations with friends, you are entitled to that, and it's okay. Can you honestly say, I can set all of my opinions, my very strong and negative opinion, I can apply the presumption of innocence, and I can listen to this case based on the evidence in court? Can you say that?
Yeah, I think it's a really tough thing for me to do, but I also think digging into like who I am and saying like set that aside, listen to evidence, because it is such a huge case that we need to do what's right, that I think I can do that.
Okay. Can you foresee a situation where what's right to do is to find Mr. Chauvin not guilty?
Can you say that again?
Sure. Can you imagine a situation where the right thing to do is to find Mr. Chauvin not guilty?
Yeah, I have thought that through my head, like, is this instance that I'm aware that that is a possible outcome. So knowing that we have to weigh that and realizing that I am part of that or would be part of that, I think I'd be able to do that, yes.
I guess what we have to be certain of is not you think you could do it, but that you can do it.
Right.
Can you set aside all of your preconceived, opinions or your previous opinions, and can you tell us without equivocation, I can be an unbiased, neutral, fair juror in this case?
Yes, I can.
You were asked a question about the it's what we were kind of referring to as the aftermath of Mr. Floyd's death, the protests that happened after, and you were asked whether you believe our community has been negatively or positively affected by these protests, and you wrote positively affected due to the awareness of injustice. Right?
Right.
What's the injustice?
I think there is a lot of police brutality towards certain races, of course. And I think everything that's happened in the aftermath has really shown light and given voice to not just local but national cases that occur.
Okay. So I guess the question again, right? You formed an opinion that what happened to Mr. Floyd was in fact an injustice.
Right.
I understand that you have some previous military service, correct?
I do.
And were deployed internationally as a part of that?
Yes, sir.
And as a part of your military experience, you had training in hand-to-hand combat and chokeholds and things of that nature.
That's correct.
You have a knowledge base that some jurors may not have, right? And the question of police training may come up in this case, and what is trained. Would you recognize that the police training that you have, or excuse me, the military training that you have may be different than what police officers are trained to do?
Yes, I'm aware of that.
And would you be able to kind of abandon your prior personal experience and apply what is trained by the Minneapolis Police Department?
I think abandon, I guess I'm not understanding your question fully, but I'm able to understand what someone else's training is and apply that to the circumstances that they're in, if that's what you're asking.
I am,
Okay.
and I apologize if I'm not articulate. It's been a long morning.
No worries.
You were asked a series of questions that about both Black Lives Matter and Blue Lives Matter, those terms. And with respect to Black Lives Matter, you wrote that you had a somewhat favorable opinion of Black Lives Matter, and you wrote, "I am not completely knowledgeable with the organization. However, it is clear they are trying to make progress towards equality by raising awareness to events." Since you filled this out, any other opinions form about Black Lives Matter?
No, I really haven't been following any other news articles or anything, and haven't really looked into, like I had said on there, I don't really know much about the organization at all, and nothing's really changed since then.
Right, okay. And you had never heard of Blue Lives Matter?
I've never heard of it.
Okay. Do you understand what that means now sitting here today?
I make an assumption that it's, in favor of police officers and protecting them.
Okay. And you just have no opinion of that because you'd never heard of it?
Correct.
Okay. So, relevant to questions regarding the presumption of innocence, what you actually wrote was, "I think it would be a little difficult in this case, given the footage that came out and the events that followed, to apply the presumption of innocence."
Right.
So, have you formed an opinion sitting here right now that favors one verdict over the other?
No.
No? I mean, you've got some pretty strongly held opinions, right?
I do.
And you have a negative view of Mr. Chauvin. You believe that he was murdered by the police, right? And you're telling us that you would have a problem applying the presumption of innocence. So again, you know, the only mistake we can make is whether we're, I think as a juror, the only mistake is whether you're, you know, telling us the truth or not, right? And that's what I need to know is, can you take these aside, apply that presumption of innocence, and be fair to Mr. Chauvin?
Right. And again, like I said on there, like I think it's really difficult based off of what I've seen, what I've heard, but also knowing, like, you know, you got to sit there and do the right thing. Then if I'm like called upon to serve, I take that to heart and need to do what's right, guilty or innocent. So putting that aside is something that I would internally do, that I just have to follow the right path.
May I have a moment here? We'll exercise it for
Juror 69, we're going to excuse you from this jury. So, in fact, you're excused from all jury service for this term, so you're not going to be called up for another case. Unless, of course, years from now you get a summons. But the deputy will collect some things on the way out, and we appreciate the time you spent here. Thank you. All right, I have that as defense number 11. Is that correct? 11?
Yes.
All right, just some information on our schedule for tomorrow. I granted this defense request to interview the 7 seated jurors, the first 7 rather, regarding whether they were exposed to the information about the $27 million settlement. And we are arranging, we're going to do this by Zoom. I'm not going to make the jurors come in for a 5-minute hearing. So I'm going to do it by Zoom. It's discretionary anyway, so I think I am within the rules to do it by Zoom. The jurors will appear that way, and so by video, and all counsel will be on Zoom. We will just not be broadcasting the video of the juror out to the general public, consistent with our practices here. We've got it scheduled for 8:45. We've heard of from 6 out of 7 of the jurors that they would be available. The examination is going to be only by the court, not by the parties. And we will then discuss each as they tell us what they know and what they've heard. With regard to the other matters, I already denied the request for additional peremptory challenges by the defense. And the motion for a continuance and or a change of venue are still under advisement.
And I believe I had also asked for full sequestration of the jurors during trial.
And at this point, that is denied as well. All right, anything else? Just to give you a heads up for tomorrow. We will, despite the fact we have to talk to those 7 jurors, I think since it's only the court's examination that it might be fairly quick. We're going to summon the jurors for tomorrow morning. We'll bring in another 5 again, but at 9 o'clock so that they are ready to roll by 9:30. And then we'll try and get through as many as we can tomorrow morning. So we'll be summoning 5 in at 9 o'clock and 4 at 1 o'clock so that they are ready at 9:30 and 1:30 respectively. All right, anything else for the record before we break for lunch? And we'll come back at 1:30 because our other jurors are scheduled to arrive at 1 o'clock, and with the orientation, it'll be 1:30. So, anything else for the record from the state?
Not from the state, Your Honor.
All right, for the defense. All right, thank you. We're in recess.